where I stand is where the Maverick Party stands, and it's about freedom of choice, freedom of movement, and freedom what we do to our bodies. Those kind of decisions should be made between your doctor and yourself, not the government.
One of our priorities is equalization reform. And, a lot of people say that's a tall asking point, and it is. It's been done before, though. We want to fight against the carbon tax. It's not, it hasn't been shown to be effective.
If the West could send 100 members that just care about the West, they would be the balance of power. Now, that is what the Bloc has been successful in doing these past years. And it's easy for them because they only have two decisions to make when policy comes to their caucus. Is it good for Quebec? Is it not? And that's how they determine their vote. And that's what we want to do in the West. We want to be a voice of 100 strong, standing in Ottawa saying, we won't deal with you unless it's good for the West.
The PPC have a similar platform. We differ in some key ways. But again, whenever you cast a vote for a National Federalist Party, is your voice going to be represented more than, Quebec, who has 78 seats, or Ontario that has 121 seats? I don't think that that's going to happen, right? So who better to represent us than ourselves?
The PPC voter, I understand why they're drawing to Mr. Bernier, but he's parachuting people from Ontario into Western ridings to run for Western people. When it comes down to the choices, if he ever did get into power, do people really think that the party will support the West or support the East?
Sheila Gunn Reid for Rebel News, and in the interest of adhering to our company mission to bring you the other side of the story that you just absolutely aren't going to hear in the mainstream media, my colleague Adam Soos and I went out this week in our respective regions of the province last minute to talk to some Maverick Party candidates. Now, Adam talked to Andrea Lee. She's the Maverick Party candidate for Calgary-Shepard, and I spoke to Jeff Dunham. He's the candidate for the Edmonton area riding of Sturgeon River-Parkland. Now, the Western First Maverick Party, they haven't been receiving a ton of mainstream media coverage or attention, and they've sort of been written off as somewhat fringe. However, in 2019, Ipsos polling suggested that separatist sentiments in the West were at, quote, historic highs. In Alberta, 33% of respondents to that poll indicated that the province would be better off completely splitting from the rest of the country. That figure was only slightly lower in Saskatchewan with 27%. Now, those numbers aren't the majority, but in Canada's parliamentary system, that's enough to do pretty well in an election. So with a country that I think is more divided than ever, where people, on the other hand, are uniting across party lines to fight things like lockdowns and massive government overreach into our lives, I think there's a lot of room for a Western separatist Bloc Québécois style party to fill a void. So with all that being said, let's hear it from our Maverick Party candidates. Take a listen.
I came to Alberta from Saskatchewan, a southwestern boy, and in the late 80s there wasn't much work in Saskatchewan, so I followed the pipeline that was in town right into Alberta. And I spent 10 years working in the oil field, ending my career on a drilling rig, throwing chain. I decided I needed a break from that, and I entered the University of Alberta, and it was during that time that I took on a summer job as an initial attack firefighter for the Alberta government. And it didn't take long for me to figure out that that was my passion. And so 23 years later, I've been fighting wildfires for the people of Alberta, BC, and Ontario even. And I really had no inkling of getting into politics. But I have a new son, fairly new. He's almost 3 now. But during this last couple years, I had my hopes for his opportunities of the future were getting diminished daily by what this government is doing to the West. The same opportunities for prosperity I could see slipping away day by day. And I knew I had to do something for my son, because when he's 20 years old, and if, the way things are going, if he asked me, Dad, what did you do? And I said nothing, I couldn't live with myself. So that's why when I found the Maverick, it spoke to me, it spoke to Western values, and it spoke to common sense that we in the West understand and that the East doesn't.
So I'm Andrea Lee, and I'm a federal candidate in the upcoming election for the Maverick Party, Calgary-Shepard riding.
And so there's a lot of new emerging sort of conservative options out there. What made you choose the Maverick Party?
Well, we're taking a different approach to federal governance. So the problem is, within our electoral system, in Western Canada and in Alberta, we vote for national parties. So national parties have national interests and are in pursuance of national votes. And of course, the bulk of the seats and the bulk of the votes are not in Western Canada, they're in Eastern Canada. There's 199 seats in Ontario and Quebec. So when you vote for a national party, you're in essence voting for a party that you know is pursuing Eastern votes, and Eastern interests aren't always congruent with Western interests. And we've seen that with some parties flip-flopping on equalization, carbon taxes. These are things that are important to us out here. So one way to get around having not the same amount of seats, is to vote for a regional party. So a regional party protects regional interests, similar to the way that a Bloc Québécois functions. So this is a way that you can sort of make your vote count more and ensure that when you cast your vote, you're casting your vote for a party that, appreciates your interests and will bring your, the things that concern you and your values forward in the House of Commons, and not sacrifice your interests upon the altar of Eastern votes, as we've seen national parties done. So, it's not a new concept. It's been done before. We saw it with the Reform Party in the 1980s. And so, we've already seen that it's a model that works. We've seen it in the past. We see it in the present. So if it works, then why not sort of approach that as a new way to, represent ourselves out here and sort of strengthen our voice and our votes.
What specifically about the Maverick Party? Because some people would say, well, the PPC speaks to me because they are sort of decentralized, anti-federalist, pro-freedom. But what specifically about Maverick appeals to you and should appeal to me?
Well, it should appeal to all Westerners because it's about true Western representation, which since Confederation, the West has never gotten. We've been a cash cow. The latest carbon tax and the increases of that affects, the most vulnerable in the West. Not only deters industry from investing in our resources, which are the most environmentally ethical produced resources in the world, I will argue. It just seems like they're kicking us when we're down, but yet they still want to benefit from all the hard work that we do in the West. We've been doing it ourselves for as long as we've been in Confederation with no help from the East. And I think it's about time that we say, hey, leave us alone and let us do our own thing.
One of the major issues that has arisen for lots of people is these questions of civil liberties. So with vaccine passports being announced just this week, and a number of other issues emerging that are concerning citizens, the Conservative Party certainly hasn't deferred much from Justin Trudeau on it. Max has made his opinion clear. He's clearly opposed to these vaccine passports. Where does the Maverick Party stand on this issue?
So, we stand for freedom. So, when I looked at the vaccine passport thing, I actually went all the way back to, a lot of people talk about charter rights. I went all the way back to the original Bill of Rights. So that was our first sort of civil rights law that was enacted by John Baker in the 60s. It was superseded by the charter in 1982, but it's still a valid document. And so part of it was protecting, you had the right to life, liberty, personal security, and enjoyment of property. So when I look at these vaccine passports and the mandates, I sort of revisited what we, our foundational values were in the country and how we built up our laws, and so we're against vaccine passports provincially for that reason, because I do feel like they contravene sort of the foundational freedoms, liberties that, our country was founded upon and subsequently built upon within the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So we stand firmly against them.
Where I stand is where the Maverick Party stands, and it's about freedom of choice, freedom of movement, and freedom what we do to our bodies. Those kind of decisions should be made between your doctor and yourself, not the government, not bureaucrats. And what's going on right now is a plain and clear attack on civil liberties. And the one that I'm most worried about is our liberty of our body. If we can't control what we do with our body, and we allow people that don't care about us to make those choices, then we're in trouble.
Let's say you could do a few things for Alberta right off the bat. What would the priorities be for yourself and for the Maverick Party?
Well, one of our priorities is equalization reform. And, a lot of people say that's a tall asking point, and it is. It's been done before, though. The problem with equalization is that it's a fixed growth formula. So what that means is that regardless of the circumstances of the province and the discrepancy between the wealth, transfers will always increase, regardless if you're have or have not province. And we have seen that gap widen with the downfall of Western Canada's economy. So a really simple way is to go back and say, hey, would it be reasonable to say that we're not going to do equalization as a fixed rate formula? Instead of increasing transfers regardless of wealth discrepancy, if a province has a bad year, could we decrease the transfers that year? Realistic things like that. Of course, we want to fight against the carbon tax. It's not, it hasn't been shown to be effective, right? We've had one for years in British Columbia. And, some studies have said that a carbon tax has to go up to about $2,000 per ton for it to actually make it an effective way of environmental management. So that's a priority of ours. We also have a few constitutional amendments. And so these are geared towards sort of greater provincial autonomy. So there's a market access amendment and there's a provincial rights amendment. And so basically these will say that the provinces have greater autonomy and they're able to manage market and, do what they like with their own resources within their province. And so that, basically it's saying that each province has the right to explore their markets and, make them benefit their economy and their citizens, and that they can do so without sort of federal legislation blocking their access to their own markets, because the federal government doesn't necessarily know what is good for each individual province. So those are two great amendments. And again, that's another sort of, tall order request. You don't want to go in and amend the Constitution, right? So the problem is that we have, unless you're Quebec and you can unilaterally amend the Constitution, most of us have to use the general amending formula. So it says that we need 7 provinces with 50% of the population to vote on it, along with the Commons and the Senate. So the great thing about these amendments is that they're reasonable, they're realistic, because they don't just benefit Western Canada, they also can potentially benefit every province. So we're not just talking about introducing a constitutional change that is going to, give Alberta a leg up, right? This could be good for fisheries. This could be good for the dairy industry, right? So it's sort of a wide amendment. So there's really no reason for any province to vote it down. So I have a lot of faith in those amendments and hoping to push them through.
Some of the criticism I hear about the Mavericks is sort of the same criticism that you'll hear about the Bloc, in that, well, you're never going to be in charge. You're just a regional party. But you and I were talking about this off camera, that you don't have to be in charge to be in charge. We saw this unfolding in British Columbia with the two Greens that held the balance of power that keeps the NDP together there. So how would you address that criticism as a Maverick Party candidate? How do you influence Ottawa depending on the outcome, I guess, of the next election?
Well, historically, we've had minority governments being propped up by other parties, such as BC, the Liberals being propped up by the NDP. If the West could send 100 members that just care about the West, they would be the balance of power. Now, that is what the Bloc has been successful in doing these past years. And it's easy for them because they only have 2 decisions to make when policy comes to their caucus. Is it good for Quebec? Is it not? And that's how they determine their vote. And that's what we want to do in the West. We want to be a voice of 100 strong, standing in Ottawa saying, we won't deal with you unless it's good for the West.
Now, I sort of mentioned it off the top. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is this is the riding of Pastor James Coates, imprisoned for 35 days at the hands of the provincial government for refusing to close his church. And I attended many protests at the courthouse here in this riding. And the courthouse is actually across the street from the Conservative MP's office, Dane Lloyd. And he was not only completely absent on the issue, but completely silent. We never heard a word from anybody in the federal party about the civil liberties infringements unfolding due to the coronavirus. I guess, what's your position on the state of civil liberties, particularly here in Alberta, because this is where you are, and you tell me if it's good for the West, then that's something that you'll fight for. How did you feel about how absent the federal Conservatives were on these issues?
Well, I think that lends back to why I got involved with the Maverick Party and why I think standing up for Western citizens is important, because we're not getting that. Mr. Lloyd here in this riding, he got in when he was 24 years old, right out of university, on the shirt tails of Rona Ambrose when she resigned, and we haven't seen him. He wasn't anywhere near the Coates incident, and my guess is that his party is telling him to toe the party line. Well, as a Maverick member, the only line I toe is the citizens' line. And that means not just the people that I vote for, but everybody that is affected in my riding. And I will be available Monday to Friday in my office to address those issues. Now, when it comes to civil liberties, I'm bound as an MP to protect all the people's civil liberties. And how I go about that will be by communicating with my people in my riding to see where they stand on such issues. And that's hopefully we'll build a stronger community and a stronger voice to go to Ottawa.
Now, you and I were talking off camera too, and I learned something about the Mavericks that I didn't know, and that is that even though your leader is a former whip of a federal party, you guys are not going to have a whip, which I guess fosters independence and connection with your constituents.
Well, yeah, because that's the only way we can get a true voice from our riding into Ottawa is if I listen to my constituents, not towing the party line. And the party isn't my boss. The citizens are my boss. And that's how I'm going to look at it, just like a job. You know, I'm going to be responsible to get my community together, to make networks happen. So when things get rough, we have people that are willing to help each other get ourselves out of the troubles that we face. And in today's society, with the division that's being promoted by all government parties, I think you said it, they're not following ideological values. They're just following things that will get them into power, and they will say anything, and it's all lip service. And for the people of Sturgeon River-Parkland, you know, I think they have to realize they're just singing a song. Well, we come from the West. Talk is talk, but when you walk the walk, that's how you get things done.
Now, I'll ask you in closing the question that my friend and colleague Adam Soos asks all the Conservatives, but also the Mavericks and the PPCers. Every candidate that he talks to, he asks them, in your first 30 or 90 days in office, what's your priority?
Well, I'm not a politician, so my first priority will be learning the ropes. I will, again, be leaning a lot on my team, the people that have gotten me this far, to, you know, make sure that I address what's coming, you know, in the first 30 days properly to best represent my people. I think my first 30 days will be organizing my constituents and reaching out to my constituents to ask them what they need me to take to Ottawa. And from there, I'll work on that for the next 4 years.
To any constituents in Calgary-Shepard who might be on the fence, why should they vote for you specifically?
Because I'll represent them, right? I'm out there, I'm door knocking. You know, it takes a bit of explanation. Again, you know, just saying, why are you voting for a national party? And, you know, usually when I point out, well, how did you vote last election? And how did you vote the election before that? And did you get what you want out of those votes, right? And what happened for you out here in Western Canada? Nothing good happened for us out here voting the same way. So we're saying, you know what, let's look at the way the game is played. We have a stacked deck against us. Let's change the way that we play the game. And that's a very, very simple reason for people to turn around and say, yeah, why am I voting for a party that's not going to necessarily represent me because I don't have the seats to make a difference? So, you know, most people are very, very happy to turn around and switch their vote.
Maybe some other reasons why folks should maybe consider voting for yourselves instead of, let's say, the PPC or the Conservatives.
Well, again, you know, so the PPC have a similar platform. We differ in some key ways. But again, whenever you cast a vote for a National Federalist Party, You know, is your voice going to be represented more than, Quebec, who has 78 seats, or Ontario that has 121 seats? I don't think that that's going to happen, right? So who better to represent us than ourselves, right? Who is going to listen to people in Western Canada who don't have the population, don't have the votes, but we certainly have opinions. We contribute a lot. And, we're not valued within our current electoral system. So that's why I would say, vote for a regional party, because we will always stand true to the values. We're not going to merge with another party, and we have no obligation to any other parts of Canada. So, when we vote, it's very simple. If it's good for us, we vote with it. If it's bad for us, we vote against it.
The PPC and the Mavericks are sort of drawing on from the same well of disaffected Conservative voters. So, if there's a PPC voter watching right now, why should they vote for the Mavericks?
Well, the PPC voter, I understand why they're drawing to Mr. Bernier, but he's talking about an issue that really isn't in federal jurisdiction. And he hasn't laid out any...
The vaccines.
The vaccines, sorry. Yeah, and vaccine passports. Not that I won't fight, against anything that will affect our civil liberties, but that's all he's talking about. He has no policy that is designed by his members. He hasn't had an AGM. And realize that he's parachuting people from Ontario into Western ridings to run for Western people. When it comes down to the choices, if he ever did get into power, do people really think that the party will support the West or support the East? Well, my answer to that is pretty clear, and I think people can make their own deduction, is that he'll have to cater to the East and forget about the West.
Well, Jeff, thanks for taking the time. I know it's very busy. We're in the home stretch. Thankfully, I think we're all pretty tired of the election campaign. So thank you for taking the time out of your campaign to talk to me today, and best of luck.
Well, thank you so much, Sheila, and it really means a lot that Rebel News is paying attention to the Maverick Party.
You're the little guy, we're the little guy, and you appeal to normal people, and I think we do too. So I think we have some camaraderie in that.
Yeah, it's the little people against the machine. Let's go, little people.
So what do you think, guys? Did you hear something that you haven't heard in the mainstream media? Of course you did. Are the Mavericks going to tap into that same anti-establishment vote that the People's Party of Canada seems to be tapping into here in Alberta? I guess we'll find it all out on election night. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. At Rebel News, we don't get $1.5 billion like the CBC to ask Justin Trudeau puffball questions. We ask hard questions, and we talk to the people the mainstream media doesn't want you to hear from. If you'd like to support our coverage during this election campaign, please go to realreporters.com.